LBC News, where the news never stops.
10 to 12 now. New rules requiring social landlords in England to investigate and fix dangerous damp and mould have come into force today. They're going to face court action if they fail to improve conditions as part of Awaab's law. It's named after a 2-year-old boy who died from mould exposure. We can speak now live on LBC News to Suze from the Social Housing Action Campaign. Suze, thanks for your time this morning. Do you welcome the introduction of this law?
Well, we welcome any kind of focus on damp and disrepairs and mould, which is a huge blight in social housing and in fact private housing as well across the country. But I can't say that we've really celebrated that this law is being introduced. I mean, it comes across to us as a complete abdication of government responsibility because they're pushing responsibility for enforcement in relation to repairs onto the individual, rather than bringing in a proper inspectorate and enforcement system. Awaab's law is just really reinforcing, maybe adding a little bit more onto legislation that already exists that says homes have to be fit for human habitation. Those laws are there anyway. The problem is not the lack of legislation that says homes have to be, decent and proper to live in. The problem is that it's almost impossible for individuals to enforce that. And that's the gap that is being left by this legislation. People can't get legal aid for housing issues anymore. I mean, legal aid is stretched anyway. Very few lawyers, are willing to work on legal aid. But even if there was even if there was more legal aid available, it doesn't actually cover these kind of housing situations. And what people are driven to is to use what can be quite exploitative, aren't always, but can be quite exploitative, no-win, no-fee lawyers. And they have to navigate the legal system on their own. Really what government should be doing is looking at meaningful penalties for these landlords and closing that enforcement gap, actually doing the work themselves of holding these landlords to account for the standards of the homes that they are raking in money through people's rents.
And speaking to LBC News this morning, the Housing Secretary, Steve Reed, told us that any tenant who has an issue still with damp and mould and wants to report their landlord should take it to the Housing Ombudsman. Are you confident, Suze, that the Housing Ombudsman has enough teeth to deal with this?
That's a very good point, really, is about the enforcement, about what if they fail to do it, because landlords at the moment are very, very willing, even social landlords, which people tend to think of are going to be much more responsive, are very, very willing to ignore the regulator. They will ignore the Housing Ombudsman, and they will even ignore the courts, because there is no really meaningful penalty. The penalties tend to be financial. But we are looking at landlords, for example, with Clarion, their operating surplus was 232 million in the last year. L&Q, which is another landlord where we get lots and lots of complaints about disrepairs, 377 million. So giving them a fine of £5,000 or even £10,000 is really not going to make a dent. And that's after an individual has gone forward to one of these authorities and reported it. What we want to see is a much more systematic approach from government to make sure that homes are fit for human habitation without people having to go through a lengthy, sometimes expensive and very difficult process of going to either one of the authorities like the Housing Ombudsman or through a tribunal system, through the courts. We just don't think that is good enough, is saying that this is an individual problem for you to fight out with your landlord, even though your landlord is going to have a lot more power than you when it comes to dealing with the law.
And so just give us a sense of how widespread this problem is. Obviously, this law change is named after Awaab, who, tragically died. 2-year-old boy died from mould exposure. That is a very extreme case. But, on a more day-to-day level, how widespread is this?
It's one of the frequent issues that we get complaints about. And what is shocking to see is not just the standards of disrepair, so where they have kind of life-threatening implications, the disrepair, or leave people's homes very insecure, where front doors don't lock properly, windows don't lock properly, so they leave people extremely vulnerable for harm from the outside. But also to see how long they go on for. We have seen cases that have dragged on for 5, 6, 7 years, where people have been battling with their landlord, trying to get them to address disrepairs. And even where the courts have ordered repairs to be made, those repairs have not been made. But, this is the point we just can't emphasise enough, is just how much these very big corporate landlords, whether private or whether housing association or in some cases council, are very willing to ignore court orders and just accept the fine. It's just almost another business expense to them. And that's why we say the enforcement cannot come from the bottom. It cannot come from tenants and residents. It has to come from government. It's just not good enough for them to say, no, you go and battle it out. Even getting a case listed with the Ombudsman, I believe, they would be able to tell you exactly, but I believe that the waiting list, even for that, is about 8 months. And to be living with really severe damp and mould or other kind of life-threatening disrepairs in your home for 8 months, to be living without hot water, for example, is which again has health and hygiene implications. That can drag on for 8 months even before you get the housing ombudsman can take up your case, because they've obviously got limited scope. So this the new legislation is being presented as some kind of panacea, and it really isn't. It really isn't for our members. It isn't going to make that much difference.
Suze, really appreciate your time this morning. Thank you for joining us. Suze there from the Social Housing Action Campaign.